Helicopter above, we were for a moment above the city of Sydney, heading as we will in a few moments for St Philip's to hear some of the bells of St Philip's, but just for a moment. Now we're back heading towards St Philip's and the bells of St Philip's.
Bells are the oldest bells here in Sydney. They date back to about 1858, and the first peal ever rung out in the Antipodes was rung out on Easter Saturday 1890 on these bells here at St Philip's.
Actually, the bell tower has 10 bells, but only 8 of them are actually hung for ringing.
And of course the first St Philip's, the parish of St Philip's, was the first parish in Australia, and poor old Chaplain Johnston couldn't get an actual church to go with his palace. And in the end he actually built his own expense, a wattle and daub structure in 1793. He was then told services would have to take place at 6 in the morning so as not to interfere with the labour of the convicts, and some of those non-early risers burnt down the church in 1798, and that's how they got the first stone church, because Hunter said those who burnt it down would have to build it up. It took them 11 years. They were what you might call government stroke workers.
They're a little slow. And that is this church here that we're seeing the bells ringing today, is it?
It's the same. St Philip's has been with this colony since it first began, the very name. And of course they said they called their first church after our governor. The first sermon given, of course, which was on Sunday 3rd of February, that was a divided sermon. In the morning it was for those assembled on the shore and a couple of officers. And Johnson's text is rather interesting from people at the end of such a voice. It was one of the Psalms, "What shall I render unto the Lord for all his benefits towards me?"
Let's cross now to South Head, and once again hear from Peter Wilkins and Kerry Brewster.
Happy birthday, Sydney. 200 years and the first fleet has arrived. To great applause around South Head and a massive spectator fleet, as you can see. That's the beautiful sight of the Phillips Choice Race leading the fleet. 11 of the high-tech boats, and they're escorting the first fleet reenactment into Sydney Harbour, and Soren Larsen, the flagship.
Soren Larsen, the flagship. Behind her, the Kiwi boat, Tucker Thompson. We've got Amorina, the Swedish boat. We've got them all. Can you believe it? What a sight that is.
Well, if Sydney Harbour is the 200th birthday cake, I can tell you there's an awful lot of candles on it, Kerry, at the moment.
Yeah, there's more boat than water out there. Very nervous captains, I can imagine, biting their nails, thinking how on earth they're going to get through all the spectator craft. I'm not sure what boats they are.
Well, that looks like the Soren Larsen.
That's the Bounty,
in fact. The Bounty there.
It's a little backlit from where we're seeing it. We're having a bit of difficulty identifying him.
With the sails, but what a majestic sight.
And luckily they've got all their square sails up.
What a majestic sight the Bounty is.
We've got choppers in the air. We've got skyships.
38 crew on board the Bounty there, and a few more today, I think. A few, well, not hangers-on, but enjoyers of what's a fantastic moment. They do carry 650 square feet of sail, and they'd have a significant proportion of that up at the moment there.
Yeah, they've got a good lot up. I think that they'll be very pleased. And there's an aerial showing just how many people there are out watching it. It's quite exciting here at the moment at South Head. Right now they're filing right past us.
And that's looking further
we
back
see
in
some
the fleet.
people manning the yard up there. You can see them right up there. What a sight they've got. You can hear the chopper flying overhead.
Well, every picture tells a story, and that one certainly does on Sydney Harbour.
That's the flagship, Soren Larsen, and two of the crew standing right up on the upper yard. On board we've got the fleet surgeon, the fleet purser, the commodore. On board also the Soren Larsen, the youngest full voyager. Natasha Davies, 4 years old in December. She celebrated her 4th birthday in the Great Australian Bight. She's the daughter of the captain, Tony Davies. She's travelling with her elder brother, Tristan Davies, who's now 7. So it's quite a family boat, the Soren Larsen. They sing lots of sea shanties. Although I guess right now they're too busy watching where they're going to be singing. They'll be doing that tonight once they're in Farm Cove.
Certainly. The Soren Larsen there, perhaps 40 metres in front of the Tucker Thompson.
Here we have a skywriter. Can you make out what that is?
Welcome again. Hello world.
Hope it's not a dyslexic skywriter. There's another view. Soren Larsen again. I'm sure that's Soren Larsen. Let's hope all the boats keep a little bit of distance. Look at that. You can see trade wind.
And up ahead of the fleet, the perfect vector formation of the Phillips Choice race, which is led by Love and War. 74-78 Sydney Hobart winner. We might be able to pick up a shot of her sailing very elegantly with the main up at the moment and the big sprinkler boat, but what we're seeing is back in the fleet of fraction and the busyness that is on the harbour today.
And this is what the crews have been waiting for, to get to Sydney Harbour. They've taken more than 8 months to get here. What's that one? I'm not sure. This is it. This is what they've been working so hard for, to actually reach Sydney Harbour. They've come a long, long way. They've weathered a lot of storms. They've lost the first mate of Anna Christina overboard. So I imagine on Anna Christina right now a very emotional crew.
And there the water spray over the Phillips Choice boats. And back to the majestic First Fleet reenactment.
There's the Soren Larsen again, the flagship. What a welcome. All the guests on board you can see. And some boats quite close upside. It is
the Phillips Choice fleet. Up ahead, Love and War there leading them, leading the point of the cone. Sagacious is in second place, the Admiral's Cuppa. Then we've got Beyond Thunderdome and Drake's Prayer, Wild Oats and Pacific Phoenix. They're all there. Paladin, Salacia 2. Some fantastic names in yachting around Sydney Harbour. Another Concubine, Nadia 4. And bringing up the rear, Starlight Express, and very much what they're heading to, the Opera House. And what a crowd building up at the Opera House. Look at them.
Here's a wide shot.
We almost had to, well, we thought we had an airship collision, but that's about how far they are apart. One to the other, the two airships high aloft Sydney Harbour, and the view below. Absolutely fantastic.
What boat's that one? It might be Eye of the Wind, that one, who joined in Perth. Fantastic sight. If it is Eye of the Wind, I think it is. It's a very luxurious boat. All the people watching from the shore. We have the Kiwi boat, Tucker Thompson. Sailed all the way from New Zealand to London and back again. Some more people manning the yard. That's a precarious feeling, being up there.
You were out there on One and All several times?
Yeah, it felt very precarious the first few times going up, but you do get used to it after a while.
And more of the festivity, all celebrating in their own little way 200 years of history. The first fleet reenactment wending their way down Sydney Harbour.
And I imagine what Porsche's thinking about all this, because it would be a very different sight when the first fleet came through. Maybe a few dugout canoes, but nothing like this. They will feel very privileged to be up there on the yard and watching all this.
And you'd feel fairly privileged to be up there watching the yard, which is the Opera House surrounds, and thousands upon thousands of people gathered there, and they won't have too long to wait. The fleet
A lot of people
passing middle head at the moment.
A lot of people on the fleet have deliberately stayed in Botany Bay before because they didn't want to spoil their first sight of Sydney. So they stayed on board, didn't tempted to come up to Sydney, but left it till today to get their first sight of Sydney from on board the boat.
That's not a bad first sight.
There's Bounty.
Star of stage screen in Sydney Harbour.
Yeah, she's the glam ship, isn't she? So I was saying earlier, Anna Christina lost her first mate overboard halfway between Rio and Cape Town. So he's one person who can't see this sight, but for all the crew of Anna Christina, Henrik Nielsen, their first mate, is still with them. His soul's still with them. There's an aerial of Bounty, all its square sails up. I had a steer of Bounty actually in Fremantle. It's quite good fun. It's got a very big wheel on Bounty.
Oh,
She looks a great boat, but she's a slow boat, you know. She is the slowest in the fleet. Where's Bounty? Where's Bounty? She was always about 200 miles behind.
But still quicker than the 3 knots they averaged for the first fleet 200 years ago.
Is that right, 3 knots?
3 knots.
Bounty was about 3 knots a lot of the time. She did put her engines on.
The foreshores looking out across the harbour.
That's Eye of the Wind. Very luxurious boat below decks. A lot different from the ship that I sailed on, one and all, the Australian sail training ship, which was very cramped below.
And if you can
That's a
stretch
beautiful
the
boat.
imagination a bit back 200 years ago, you'd see the Borrowdale perhaps and the Golden Grove sailing in alone.
Alone.
Well, not altogether alone, they had 9 companions. In the form of the Sirius, the Lady Penrhyn, the Fishburne, the Charlotte, the Scarborough, the Prince of Wales, the Alexander, the Supply, and the Friendship.
But even today, the most overwhelming feeling is that this is history. This is history right now in the harbour. I don't think there's ever been a voyage, except for the first fleet, of course, but there hasn't been a voyage like this since then.
Well, when do you think that hit home with the people on board? Was it straight away, do you feel, or perhaps halfway round, or on one of the longer legs, say from
Of how important a voyage it was?
yeah.
I think people were very committed to it right from the beginning. Of course, in Australia, we didn't hear much about them for a long time. Look at that shot.
Look out, Sydney!
How on earth are they going to get through all that?
Well, of course, as the boats move further up the harbour towards the Opera House and the harbour bridge, the supporting fleet of Sydney craft of all shapes and sizes are congesting up.
We've
It's going to
seen
be
one
the big
casualty.
squeeze.
We've seen one casualty already.
That's
One
right.
police boat towing a motor craft away. Mainstay. That's the sponsor of Svanen, our Svanen, the Canadian ship. All heading in the same direction, luckily.
Forced to enter a line in. The order was a little different to the one planned, with the exception of Soren Larsen, the flagship, which was in fact leading the way. And where is the way, you might ask?
It's fantastic. Bounty once again. Australia Post has been Bounty's sponsor, as you can see from the Australia Post flag.
Late again? Should I
No,
say
right on time today, right on time.
today.
But as I was saying before, a very emotional time for a lot of the full voyages. There's Amorina. Alan Bond is on board Amorina today. A little different from the state of the craft he's used to. State-of-the-art craft, I'm sorry.
Swedish Barkentine, Amarina. 55 berths on board, 19 cabins, and they are in relative luxury there compared to the rest of the fleet.
They have a big bar as well. Quite notorious.
If you're trying to get some sort of concept of size, the Amarina 48.5 metres long, but not quite as long as
Not quite as long as that one.
the Fair Star or the
Which one
Sea
is it?
Princess, is it? That's a way to end a cruise. The Sea Princess has been in the South Pacific for 11 days, and not a bad way to tidy up a nice holiday.
It looks very ordered in a way, doesn't it? I mean, there are lots of boats out there, but I think it's likely that they're quite calm conditions.
Will it stay that way?
I think it will.
From the
Southeast pylon of the bridge, we see up the harbour.
looking
Where
pretty
are they?
lonely down there at the moment on the water. They've got a shock in store.
What's going to happen when they all get there?
That.
Some bottleneck.
So we have the 11 ships today, the Soren Larsen, the Amarina, our Svanen, Solway Lass, which joined the fleet just for the run into the harbour, into Sydney Harbour, regularly seen on Sydney Harbour
We have one
as
and
a
all.
charter boat.
Tradewind, Eye of the Wind, Tucker Thompson, Anna Christina, another ship that's joined the fleet from Botany Bay, Enactment 2, and Bounty.
So 11 to make up the numbers. 9 actually made the journey out here.
They're beautiful ships, aren't they? They're floating museums.
Or in the case of Amarina, floating palaces perhaps.
She's not that luxurious. More people in the crowd.
Chatting on the headland. And the Prime Minister returning to the place of Admiralty House is where the Prime Minister is at the moment, and he's going to go across to the Opera House. He was there yesterday for the handing over of the Young Endeavour. A kiss goodbye. And on the way for yet another big day in the prime ministerial year of 1988.
Everyone's on the harbour today.
And later on this afternoon, the Young Endeavour, the ship that was handed over yesterday from British hands to Australian, will be leading the tall ships parade, and that will be another mega production of sail and engine down the harbour. Still, it is, as you said, Kerry, before, very ordered and good to see. We can only hope it remains that way, and there's not too many, if any, casualties.
Well, I guess they're very expectant, waiting there at the Opera House or at Admiralty House. There they are. They'd better get over quick. They haven't probably got much time.
Well, the fleet made good time from just outside the heads to inside the heads. As it turned out, it looked as though they were going to take about an hour and a half, but they fired up the big Volvo engines in some cases and motored in.
Sydney Harbour has never seen something quite like this.
And another boat goes out to join the masses. That is the venue for the tall ships parade later this afternoon before they make their way up towards us again from the bridge. They'll venture round Bradley's Head and move up the harbour.
Well, we've seen the Prime Minister leaving Admiralty House, and he and Mrs. Hawke will be heading for the Man of War steps at Farm Cove, where they'll be met by the Governor General and Lady Stephen.
Hoping that they actually get there before all of this arrives too. Yes.
It won't be very long before their Royal Highnesses Prince Charles and Princess Diana head off to join the Australia Day celebrations at the Opera House. But here we can see the Premier and Mrs. Unsworth.
Waiting. And here we can see a massive Sydney-siders waiting as well. And they won't have to wait much longer. The enactment of the First Fleet is coming up the harbour at a good speed now, with several 100,000 other Sydney-siders who are messing about in their boats.
I suppose we should think for a moment of the colonies northwest of the Norwegian and his captain who spoke so beautifully about the salt of the Norwegian seamen returning to the sea, and this path too, with the tradition of sailing behind them. But one can't help but feel very sad for them.
And there's the fire tender making its way up the harbour. I noticed that although there's a great crowd of boats, ships, big and small, nobody's all that keen to sail along beside it as it's pouring those great jets of water across the harbour.
We had our dose of very rainy weather on Saturday at the weekend, and I think everybody's grateful to be able to sail around the harbour today without rain and with such fine, clear conditions. Very shortly, the Bicentennial Australia Day celebrations at the Opera House will be underway, and we cross there now to Peter Ross and Anne Dunn.
Good morning. Good morning again.
And good morning to you. Thank you, Richard.
It's a wonderful spectacle here. I'm sure we'll have to be rather sparse in the use of that adjective. But the first impression, of course, which is the strongest one, is of colour and of extraordinary brightness and lightness in the air, and some of those wide shots which you'll see later on out at the heads of Port Jackson, will show you the size of the flotilla of aircraft, sea vessels, and of course there are, yes, well, there we have that giant flag, and Port Jackson is very much alive this morning.
There are a large number of invited guests seated in the forecourt of the Opera House here. You can see that they come from a very wide variety of organisations. They come from ethnic communities, service clubs, youth groups, old age pensioners organisations, major companies, government departments. There are major public figures here, of course from church and religious groups as well. There are representatives of every local council in New South Wales here, and of course all the professions, the representatives of professional associations.
You had diplomatic corps representation and
representatives of foreign governments, also of political parties.
This is called a celebration of Australia Day, a celebration of a nation. Quite a number of titles for it. It really is the big set piece for the 26th of January 1988.
And all these guests have been magnificently entertained earlier on by the Australian Bicentennial Concert Band.
Now, the Prime Minister is on board this boat that's come from Admiralty House, and he'll be shortly arriving.
To be met by Mr. Jerry Gleeson, the Chairman of the New South Wales Bicentennial Council, and of course the State Premier, Mr. Barry Unsworth.
And they'll be all in readiness, of course, for the arrival of their Royal Highnesses, which will happen in about 15 minutes' time.
The Australian Defence Force Guard, whom we saw earlier this morning at Customs House, are in fact on duty at Man of War Steps, and also the Heritage Guard. Now there you can see the assembled visitors beneath the great shells of the Sydney Opera House.
And of course, beyond the Opera House, all the foreshores of Sydney, across to Cremorne, right through underneath the bridge, everywhere. The place is literally packed with people. As we said earlier today, 1 million visitors were expected in Sydney for the celebration. I'm sure that's going to be the case. Now we expect the royal party. Yes.
Prince Charles and Lady Diana are at Woolloomooloo. They're going to depart from number 11 Wharf, Woolloomooloo, in a few moments from now, scheduled to arrive from
Government House.
From Government House, and to arrive at 11 a.m. at Man of War Steps. That's where expected to. We see them there about to depart from number 11 Wharf at Woolloomooloo.
In about yes.
1 minute.
All is in readiness here now for the arrival of the Prime Minister.
Side of this main staircase, and the Royal Guard will come from the western side.
Now we're on the royal party now as they
prepare to depart from Woolloomooloo. Saying their farewells to Government.
Now, what is the Princess of Wales wearing?
I was afraid you were going to ask me that. I'm absolutely hopeless at describing people's fashions. I think people can see for themselves,
yes,
don't you, Peter?
It looks like green and yellow. It looks like Federation
she seems as though she has made that gesture towards the bicentenary colours.
Yes, yes.
That green and the yellow of Prince Charles' tie.
Yes. And the Princess of Wales was having an animated conversation with Sir Ninian Stephen.
And of course, Prince Charles and Princess Diana will arrive together with the Governor-General and his wife, with Sir Ninian Stephen and Lady Stephen.
Well, they're just, there's some little time, I think, actually, before they leave. It won't take them very long to
well, it's all scheduled down to the last minute, of course. They can't get on board any earlier, otherwise they'd arrive too early.
And there's no point in shopping around this harbour. It's a little bit choppy. A lot of tremendous amount of traffic on the harbour today. Quite amazing. It's one of the great sights, and you'll see plenty of it today.
It's very much, in some respects, a naval or maritime celebration.
Very
rightly so, of course, because, I mean, the settlement of Australia was undertaken right up until the point where you could fly across the oceans purely by the sea. It's one of the greatest waterborne migrations of a people anywhere in history.
And His Royal Highness is a commander in the Royal Navy, as indeed his father was. In fact, I had a discussion about that yesterday with Commander Bob Richards, who said that he wasn't made more, his status wasn't increased because his father was a commander and he couldn't be promoted above his father's rank.
Protocol is all.
So we have some cloud, you see, but it doesn't look at all threatening, even though it's a little grey.
Now we see the Heritage Guard coming into position for the arrival of the royal party.
Yes, and what a sight that is too. That's wonderful.
Now, the Heritage Guard is made up of 108 soldiers and sailors in historic costume. You can see the historic costume there of the 30 Royal Australian Navy sailors wearing the naval uniforms worn at the time of the First Fleet.
Except they didn't have shoes in those days. That's true, they didn't. No. Now
the Australian Defence Force Guard, of course, members of all three services, the naval contingent from HMAS Narinda.
Sometimes known as the tri-service, we don't much like the expression.
The Army contingent from the 3rd Battalion, the Royal Australian Regiment, an airborne infantry role, and the Air Force component ground crews from various units around Sydney.
This, of course, is a great ceremonial occasion. It's a heaven-sent opportunity for regimental showing off, if you like. And the crowd, we all respond to it so quickly.
And the Royal Australian Navy Band.
I think that's a very early flyover, and it might be just a stray aircraft somewhere.
There are something like 13 helicopters in the air over Sydney Harbour this morning.
That really is about saturation level, I would think.
Yes.
And now coming from Admiralty House, I believe it is the Prime Minister. Yes, I think it's the Prime Minister. And he's made this trip several times, of course. He made it yesterday under the same conditions, making the same quick visit. It's only just across the harbour to Admiralty House. Described as the choicest piece of real estate in Sydney.
Understanding that Prime Minister is
yes, and now His Royal Highness is about to join the launch. Hello. Hello. And there's
now the royal party departs from Woolloomooloo.
Yes.
So you can see how it's tightly coordinated from crucial points all around Sydney Harbour, departures and arrivals. While we here are waiting in readiness for their arrival, they're leaving exactly to time, just around the corner.
Yes, it's always a great sense of occasion too when dignitaries arrive by boat, pull up at these man-of-war steps.
Well, it couldn't be anything more appropriate for the celebration of Australia Day than to have most of our celebratory activities take place on the water, because
yes, it's very
this is one of the greatest harbours in the world,
and
after
a great
all.
maritime city.
Indeed, and one of the safest harbours in the world. Captain Hunter, who was sent out to chart the harbour, recorded that you may, once you've passed Sow and Pigs, the only navigational hazard at the entrance to the harbour, you may drop anchor wherever you like.
Yes.
There's very few harbours in which you can say that.
The safest harbour in the universe was the expression that he used. Yes. Yes.
Prince Charles and Lady Diana seated with Sir Ninian and Lady Stephen, of course, Sir Ninian waving to the crowd along the wharves.
Oh.
Now here we are at the man-of-war steps, where you can see the Prime Minister, Mr. Hawke, awaiting the arrival of the royal party.
And Mrs. Hawke is wearing that famous Australian hat of hers.
Yes.
At a Kubra hat, I think it is. Yes.
Now you can see the Heritage Guard all lined up in the various uniforms of the various eras. The Army contingent are wearing 6 different uniforms throughout the various periods of our history.
It's because those 18th century uniforms are intriguing, aren't they? The sailor uniforms.
The Royal Australian Navy Band.
Yes, now there you get a sampling of people, Sydney people, virtually almost hanging from the trees everywhere. Every available part of the foreshore has been taken up. Every vantage point has been used. People who were parking there, you know,
from the early hours.
As early as 6 o'clock this morning, yes. And forewarned with their sunblock and their big hats. Actually, on this day in in Surgeon John White's diaries, it was 70 degrees, closer to 80 degrees, I would think, actually, in the old scale. But it was 29.98 and the barometer was rising. And he said ashore it was remarkably hot, H-O-T-T, 18th century spelling. Well, it's not remarkably hot today. There's a southeasterly, I think it's a southeasterly, certainly an easterly
Probably
breeze.
not quite enough wind for the ships of the First Fleet, who are gradually, of course, making their way down towards Farm Cove. You can see how many of the... you can see now some of the tall ships.
Yes. Now we get some perspective about the flotilla of ships that will accompany
The First Fleet reenactment when they arrive,
when
yeah.
they come back in. And that will be an enormous family of boats coming into Port Jackson and making their way to Farm Cove.
Yes, that small group of 11 accompanied by so many waterborne well-wishers.
Yes.
And here comes the royal party.
Yes.
Appropriately named the Captain Phillip.
Captain Phillip regarded as one of the most benign governors of the fledgling state of New South Wales, a man very much ahead of his time, a progressive man. His successors were not quite so humane sometimes, but he was a remarkable man. And I think commemorated only in Sydney by a street. I can't think of any other commemoration.
No, I can't either. No, I think that's...
I think he deserves more.
well, he has the Captain Phillip on
Yes.
board which now
Yeah.
the royal party are shortly to step from.
Now they're preparing for the disembarkation.
The Premier, Prime Minister, and the Chairman of New South Wales Bicentennial.
Now there you see the naval contingent dressed in the uniform of the fleet at the time.
It wasn't a flippant remark of mine about shoes, because I was reminded again by a Royal Australian Navy officer yesterday that shoes were never a part of the actual uniform rig. They used to improvise whatever they wore on their feet. Right, there's the Premier, and Mr. Dunsworth, Prime Minister, and...
Now he is greeting the administrators of the Northern Territory and Norfolk Islands. That is Commodore Johnston there, Eric Johnston, Administrator of the Northern Territory. And before him, Commodore Matthew, the Administrator of Norfolk Island, and his wife. Now, some of the governors of the states, the General Sir Philip Bennett, the Governor of Tasmania, and Lady Bennett.
The Vice-Regal Party, of course, were here yesterday when the Young Endeavour was passed over.
Dr. Davis Mackackie, Governor of Victoria, and his wife. Sir Walter Campbell, Governor of Queensland, and Lady Georgina Campbell. Followed by Professor Gordon Reid, the Governor of Western Australia, and Mrs. Ruth Reid.
Now, I think after the governors, we probably will see the premiers of the various states, will we? Or have they already taken their position?
I think we may have missed them. I think they were arriving while we were looking at admiring the harbour.
I see.
His Excellency Lieutenant General Sir Donald Dunstan, Governor of South Australia, Air Marshal Sir James Rowland, Governor of New South Wales, were the last to be presented. And they, of course, now are going to the dais here right in front of the central shell of the Opera House for the official party, behind which are already seated the Philharmonia choirs and the Sydney Symphony Orchestra. The crowd greeting him enthusiastically.
And within about 7 minutes, the royal party will be officially met here at the Man of War steps near the Sydney Opera House, and the proceedings will begin.
By His Excellency Professor Reid, Governor of Western Australia, and Mrs. Reid.
Looking remarkably animated. I must say that hat goes through to remarkably well, doesn't it?
For the benefit of the crowd assembled here, Stephen Hall, Director of the Festival of Sydney, is introducing each of the governors as they come onto the dais. Meanwhile, Mr. Unsworth and Mr. Hawke await the arrival of the royal party.
And shortly after the arrival of the Prince and the Princess of Wales, there'll be a royal salute.
Oh, you can see clearly now how the heritage contingent is lining the Man of War steps. And of course there's this marvellous crowd all along the shores of Farm Cove here.
And with the background, that's the Royal Botanic Gardens behind.
And the site, of course, of the colony's first farm, indeed.
Yes,
hence
indeed,
its name.
A farm that failed in the first season, and the fledgling colony nearly perished of starvation. It was a very fragile beginning to
Indeed it was.
Wales
They planted some 9 acres with corn.
And it was the wrong time of the year.
They've got their seasons back to front.
But we are down
now the harbour crowded with vessels and the fire ships still spraying away.
We really do have a simply perfect day again today. We're very lucky.
And white gloves, you can see it yourself, I'm sure.
Now I think that is the royal
The
barge.
approach of the royal party.
Yes.
The guards are presenting arms.
And it will take a little while before that barge comes alongside. It's slightly deceptive with that long shot. You think it's closer than it is. But they would have a good couple of minutes to go yet, I think. But that looks fine, doesn't it?
Very fine.
They're preparing to come alongside. This is the second official function that their Royal Highnesses have attended. Of course, they were here yesterday when they saw the handing over of the young Endeavour to Australia, the gift from the British government to the Australian government. That looked like the Royals, but I think we might have been deceived.
I think we might be in for the arrival of more governors.
Yes, I think that might be the case too. But it was deceptive because they seemed to be uniformed and very formal, and so I thought it was the Royals.
In fact, interestingly enough, one of the few people not to be in uniform who's entitled to today, of course, is Prince Charles.
Yes, yes, he's a commander in the Royal Navy.
And as he is out of uniform, he won't in fact be returning the royal salute. Normally, as he did yesterday, he will salute.
Sir James and Lady Rowland.
Sir James and Lady Rowland now meeting Mrs. Hawke, Prime Minister.
All their Excellencies, the Governor General, Her Excellency Lady Stephen.
He's the Governor of New South Wales, of course, who has already presided over a very important proclamation ceremony early this morning at Customs House in Sydney, believed to be the actual spot where the proclamation 200 years ago occurred.
Being greeted there by Mr. Gleeson, I think, the chairman of the New South Wales Bicentennial Council. Well, now you can see the tricorn hat there of the Marines, of the 18th century Marines. They arrived with the First Fleet in 1788. They served in the colony till 1791. 4 companies of Marines, amounting to 213 men in all, accompanied the first settlers to Australia.
Now, we think this might be the Royals. We have high hopes of it.
Commit yourself at
In
this
point of
stage,
fact, it's
Peter.
2 minutes to 11, and I think they wouldn't be late. So we can reasonably rely on the fact that this is the Royal Barge, this is the Royal vessel.
Escorted by a police vessel, their water police vessel.
Now the crowd, I'm not very good at estimating crowds. What do you like, Anne?
Well, I was told that altogether there would be something like 8,000 people, both inside and outside the Opera House today. So there are about 4,000 people here now.
This forecourt, of course, is a wonderful venue because it's so open, of course, with the wonderful background of the shelves of the Opera House and the harbour on either side. It really lends itself for great ceremonial occasions like this.
And a very clever sort of tent-like shape has been erected to protect the musicians, echoing the shapes of the shells of the Opera House. You see it come into shot there, the pole, the flag poles, and below it, the tent-like coverage to protect the singers and musicians, the Second Royal Military Band and Sydney Symphony Orchestra.
So there's the canopy that's been set up, rather like the sails of the Opera House.
Philharmonia Choir.
And they needed that because at rehearsals 2 or 3 days ago it bucketed down, and even with that canvas awning they were still drenched. So it's more to protect them against the sun, I think, than the other elements. But it's a very tastefully and beautifully designed canopy.
The Naval Band is standing by to welcome the royal party.
Now you see, there's the coat hanger on your left.
We couldn't have a better day for it.
No, it's wonderful. It is wonderful. It's no doubt a stunning city, and very much an emerald city today too. The sea is very, very green, very much alive. And here come the royals round the corner. Here they come past what I think is known as the revetment, which is that wall that's been built there. And the police escort are heading into man-of-war steps. The most popular visitors we can have to the shore, I think, universally popular, the Prince and the Princess of Wales. And they thoroughly enjoyed themselves here yesterday. It was quite obvious that they were relaxed and joined in the spirit of the whole endeavour, the young endeavour ceremony yesterday, and I'm sure that will be the same again today.
Yes, it's something that would have appealed to them particularly, I think, that handing over the sail training ship. Prince Charles has always had a strong interest in young people, as has his father, after whom, of course, the Duke of Edinburgh Award Scheme is named.
Now they're very, very close now.
Now here's in the foreground you
what an
see the
interesting shot that is too, isn't it?
In the foreground you see the Australian Defence Force Guard from the 3 services. And coming into shot now in the foreground also the Royal Heritage Guard.
Yes. Yes, certainly worth waiting for, because we have a wonderful, have a great opportunity to see.
And here you see Princess Diana waving to the crowd, who are greeting her enthusiastically. Hear their cheers, perhaps.
And she wore
Prince
a hat
Charles
like that
waving.
yesterday, actually. Wide-brimmed hat.
Very sensible in this climate.
So our royal visitors have arrived, or practically arrived, safe and sound at the steps. Yes.
The Royal Highness, the Prince and Princess of Wales.
Now hear the crowd roar as they step onto the shore, following Stephen Hall's announcement of their presence.
And shortly the royal salute.
Now shortly we'll have the royal salute when the royal party is led into position for that.
There are the inevitable greetings to be carried on, and Prime Ministers to be met and re-met over and over again. And talking to Mr. Gleeson there, who is the chairman of the New South Wales Bicentennial Council.
Yes, he is, Terry Gleeson, yes.
And that again is one of those interesting shots with so much information in the foreground, the colour of those uniforms, the mix of uniforms. The royal
in the
party.
foreground there, yes, a member of the Heritage Guard in the uniform of the Marines of the 18th century, late 18th century Marines, the tricorn hat, red jacket and white facing.
And now they're preparing to get the signal to move. And here comes the Premier of New South Wales.
Sir Ninian Stephen.
Followed by Sir Ninian
And
Stephen.
Prince Charles, of course. Sir Ninian, as you were explaining yesterday, under these circumstances actually takes precedence over Prince Charles because he is the representative of the Queen.
Yes, it's one of those little nuances of protocol
Yes.
you have to be careful about, I
I
suppose.
was fascinated.
I'm sure it doesn't miff Prince of Wales.
Amongst the members of the Heritage Guard, we saw the New South Wales Corps,
Yes.
known as came to be known infamously as the Rum Corps, of course.
indeed. Well, I must say
And the
that
contingent to the Sudan there, you can just see behind with their white pith helmets and red jackets.
Yeah.
They were sent to the Sudan in 1885. Of course, came back in khaki helmets because they kept getting killed in red.
there's a wonderful shot of the royal couple. I must say our cameras have been able to get it.
The crowd is
Nicely,
rising to
stay
its
nice and
feet
close.
as they cross
Yes.
the forecourt.
Yes, and the crowd is rising to their feet.
See the flags waving in the foreground? They're spontaneously standing and applauding as they cross in front of the Royal Defence Force Guard. Come onto the dais.
They're moving forward a little bit. They're a little cramped there for a while.
Now they'll be taking their upper position in front of 3 flagpoles here, and in the course of the royal salute, 3 standards will be broken, that is, unfurled and wave free in the breeze. They're the personal flags of the state governor, Sir James Rowland, the Governor-General, Sir Ninian Stephen, and the personal standard of Prince Charles.
Now we'll stand by for the royal salute.
There go the flags. After this, something like 100 flags will be unfurled around Farm Cove, the periphery of Farm Cove.
And there's the crowd that has been waiting here patiently for many hours for this ceremony. And there, as the cameras pull back to reveal what is really one of the great and wonderful buildings of this world. There, the Royal Highnesses are moving forward with Sir James Rowland.
Accompanied by Sir James Rowland, yes. Following the salute, Joan Carden will sing our national anthem, our national tune, strictly speaking,
Yes.
advance Australia Fair.
And then there'll be a series of speeches after that. And a prayer for the nation will be invoked by the Archbishop of Sydney, the Reverend Robinson, the Anglican Archbishop of Sydney. Now the guard is marching off, and the Royal Highnesses are preparing themselves and putting the order of service, as it were.
Princess Diana applauding the Royal Australian Naval Band as they march away, and the Defence Force Guard, the Royal Guard. There must be some glare off the forecourt, I
Yes.
think, as Princess Diana has put on her sunglasses.
It used to be that members of the royal family didn't wear sunglasses.
What a stickler for tradition you are, Peter.
No, I'm not. They were. Anyway, they're very
next to
smart.
Princess Diana is the State Premier, Mr. Unsworth, in conversation with her now.
Yes.
They have on their knees a beautifully prepared and presented programme of the day's events, of which we also were given a copy, and it gives a brief history of the settlement of
Ladies and
Port
gentlemen,
Jackson, and then an
the
order
national
of today's
anthem.
events. The national anthem. beautiful voice of Joan Carden, a Melbourne-born soprano who calls Sydney home now. Star of this month's opera in the Park in the Domain when she played Violetta.
Please be seated.
And she was
Ladies and gentlemen, the chairman of the New South Wales Bicentennial Council, Gerald Beaton. Your Excellencies, Your Royal Highnesses, the Premier, the Prime Minister, Premiers of Australian states, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the New South Wales Bicentennial Council, I welcome you to this celebration of our National Day. I welcome viewers and listeners from all across Australia. I welcome all those gathered on the foreshore of this magnificent harbour and those on the boats on the harbour, including the crews of the First Fleet reenactment voyage. I welcome all present here at Bennelong Point in the forecourt of this marvel of 20th century architecture, the Sydney Opera House. Across the nation today, ceremonies are being held to mark the 200th anniversary of the European settlement of Australia. At each of those ceremonies, Australians of diverse backgrounds will gather in a demonstration of how we live together in peace and in harmony. This ceremony in Sydney is the principal of those ceremonies, not because this is the largest of our cities, not because this is the most populous of our states, and not because of the beauty of this location. We meet here simply because it was in Sydney Cove, to my right, where that First Fleet anchored on the 26th of January, 1788. Like so many who have followed during the next 200 years, those first settlers were men and women who had to leave their homeland to start a new life. But this ceremony this morning is not about New South Wales. It's about Australia and to celebrate the achievements of the past 200 years of all Australians in all our states and territories. It is a rare occasion that brings together the vice-regal and executive government leaders of those states and territories. And therefore, I warmly welcome governors, administrators and premiers of the states and territories. Your presence demonstrates the unity of our federation that was proclaimed on the 1st of January 1901. And on that day, the first Governor-General and the first Prime Minister of Australia took office. Today, I am pleased to welcome their successors who hold office in 1988. The 20th Governor-General, Sir Ninian Stephen, and the 27th Prime Minister, Mr. Bob Hawke. I welcome the representatives of the Diplomatic Corps and all our overseas guests. We live in one of the most free and open democracies in the world, and I particularly welcome, therefore, the ministers and members of the Commonwealth, the New South Wales and the other state parliaments. The continuation of the freedoms enjoyed in Australia is dependent upon the integrity of your leadership as our elected representatives and your understanding of and sensitivity to community needs and aspirations. And finally, on behalf of all Australians, I welcome the Prince and the Princess of Wales. When Captain Cook landed in Botany Bay in 1770, he named this land New South Wales. One of the ships of the First Fleet was named the Prince of Wales. And also, Your Highness, it is recorded that one of the first actions by Phillip on landing in Sydney Cove was to raise the flag and drink a toast to the Prince of Wales. It is fitting, therefore, that Queen Elizabeth, the Queen of Australia, should be represented by the Prince and Princesses of Wales on the 26th of January 1988. On January 26, 1788, Governor Phillip took possession of this land. In celebrating the subsequent achievements, we recognise that Aboriginal Australians were the traditional owners of this land. We recall their sufferings, and also today we recall all other Australians who may suffer from poverty, illnesses and other disabilities. Australia is a great country truly described in our national anthem as a land that abounds in nature's gifts. And so please remain seated for this ceremony to begin with a prayer of thanksgiving by His Grace, the Most Reverend Donald Robinson, Archbishop of Sydney.
Let us pray. Almighty and eternal God, Creator and Preserver of all mankind, bountiful Giver, and the refuge of all who put their trust in you, we thank you on this memorable day for the land which is our home, for our life together as a nation, and for all your benefits towards us throughout 200 years. We acknowledge our many failures and pray for grace to amend what is at fault in public and in private life. Give us compassion for those among us who do not share appropriately in the bounty and prosperity of this land. Help us to respect each other as brothers and sisters made in your image, to love our neighbour as ourselves, to welcome the stranger, support the weak, to seek the common good, and to honour your name and your word above all things. We thank you for all who have gone before us, who through their toil and sacrifices have fashioned our heritage of faith and freedom. Give us unity of purpose to serve you and all our fellows in Australia and in the world, and grant us a vision of that heavenly commonwealth which is our true home. We offer this prayer in the name of our Redeemer, Jesus Christ, your Son, our Lord. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join Joan Carden, the City Symphony Orchestra and the Philharmonia Choir as they sing the bicentennial hymn, Lord of Earth and All Creation. Ladies and gentlemen, the Premier of New South Wales, the Honourable Barry J. Unsworth.
Your Excellencies, Your Royal Highnesses, Prime Minister, distinguished guests, fellow Australians, welcome. Welcome Australia. Welcome the world. Welcome to Sydney, the capital of New South Wales, the foundation state of the Commonwealth of Australia. This is our 200th birthday. This is where the story of modern Australia began. We come here today especially to remember and to honour the 1,000 men and women who completed in this cove 200 years ago one of the most remarkable voyages ever undertaken in human history. We remember the hardships they endured. We remember their terrible struggle for survival. We remember that they were exiles and outcasts from their own country. We remember above all that in pain and suffering they laid the first foundations of a great and proud city and a great and free nation. It is very necessary that we should know and understand the truth of the event we celebrate today. For unless we understand fully the true nature of that event, we will not be able to understand the true nature of our history, nor the real meaning of all that has been achieved in the 200 years since. From the worst possible beginnings, a great nation has been built. And in times of adversity, the Australian people can always draw strength from the example of that first experience. That is why we declare to the world today, we are proud to remember our origins and honour our past. But this day is really about the future. And it is a day we dedicate especially to the children of Australia. They have no share in any of the wrongs of the past. They are the future. Upon them rest all our best hopes. On this day, we can all dedicate ourselves to the task of building for our children and our children's children an even better Australia, so that in the generations to come, we of our generation may deserve to be remembered and honoured in the way we remember and honour today all those who have built this great nation over the past 200 years. Happy birthday, Australia.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, the Prime Minister of Australia, the Honourable R.J.L. Hall.
Your Excellencies, Your Royal Highnesses, Premiers of the States of the Commonwealth, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. We begin these celebrations today in no spirit of boastfulness or of national self-glorification. This is a day of commemoration. Even more important, it is a day of commitment. Commemoration of the past, commitment to the future. But my fellow Australians, today I use the word commitment in a very special sense. For our commitment to Australia is in a very real way the quality which best defines what it means to be an Australian in 1988. For let us ask ourselves on this day of all days, what is it that links us in this generation with the generations that have gone before? It is not only the fact that for the past 200 years and to this day we have been a nation of immigrants. It is not only the fact that we share together this vast continent as our homeland. It is not only the shared inheritance of all that has been built here and achieved here over the past 200 years. And it is not only the common bond of institutions, standards, language and culture. Indeed, in today's Australia, our very diversity is an ever-growing source of a richness, vitality and the strength of our community. It is true that all these things that I have mentioned go to shape the Australian character and to define the Australian identity. Yet, beyond them, there remains one vital factor in the answer to the question, who is an Australian? And that factor is a commitment to Australia and to its future. It is that common commitment which binds the Australian born of the 7th or 8th generation and all those of their fellow Australians born in any of the 130 countries from which our people are drawn. In Australia, there is no hierarchy of descent. There must be no privilege of origin. The commitment is all. The commitment to Australia is the one thing needful to be a true Australian. And today, my fellow Australians, at this historic place and at this historic hour, let us all renew that commitment. Our commitment to Australia and to Australia's cause, the cause of freedom, fairness, justice and peace.
Ladies and gentlemen, His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, my wife and I are delighted to be able to return to Australia at this very special time to celebrate with you your nation's bicentennial. It is a historic and splendid occasion for all of us, not only here in Australia, but all over the world, and not least in the United Kingdom. The modern nation of Australia began here 200 years ago today. They were harsh beginnings, and the people who were sent here against their will had little cause to rejoice. And all that was just yesterday. As history goes, 200 years is barely a heartbeat. Yet look around you and see what has happened in that time. A whole new free people. The people of a whole new free country, Australia. If it takes regular visitors from an old country to help you decide whether you should be celebrating or not, my wife and I will be glad to be of assistance. We are both very happy to have been invited to the party. When Captain Cook discovered this part of the great Southland and claimed it for the British Crown, he was sailing in quest of knowledge. And whatever is said about the founding of the British Empire, the astonishing courage and resolve of many people like Captain Cook, who dramatically advanced the sum of human knowledge in their quest for discovery and trade, should not be ignored amidst the less worthy aspects of the story. But as still happens today, when knowledge is invariably examined for its less exalted applications, King George III's ministers fairly soon saw the practical possibilities of a place where inconvenient people could be transported and forgotten. There is no point now in trying to gloss over the circumstances in which the country of which you are rightly proud began. Indeed, to face those facts is a necessary part of realizing just how proud you should be. For the sad truth is that in those early days of the colony, nobody was free. The men who guarded the convicts were in prison along with them. They were all a long way from home, and they all, no doubt, thought that Australia was the worst place in the world. But the best part about the story is that they made their prison into a new home, where freedom became not just the dream of those in shackles, but a reality for everybody. It didn't happen by accident. It took the intelligence and courage of brave men and women. Even within the astonishingly brief span which covers the whole history of modern Australia, the process of making liberty an institution took time. For the original people of this land, it must all have seemed very different. And if they should say that their predicament has not yet ended, it would be hard to know how to answer, beyond suggesting that a country free enough to examine its own conscience is a land worth living in, a nation to be envied. Anyway, most people who live here now seem to think Australia is the best place in the world, and the rest of the world finds it difficult to argue. By now, almost every country on earth is the old country to some family in Australia. Coming from your first old country and celebrating the 22nd anniversary to the month of my first transportation to Australia, let me say on behalf of all the lands and peoples who have contributed to your heritage that you have the best of us. Australia is its own creation, but in a very real sense, it belongs to the world. Australia is an international nation. People from anywhere feel at home here in Australia. It's that sort of place. In 2 world wars, Australians fought wholeheartedly against intolerance and tyranny. They didn't just fight for the old empire, which has now receded into history. They fought for freedom, which lasts if it is looked after and nurtured. One of Australia's oldest ties with the oldest of its old countries is the rule of law. They were harsh judges who sent the first Australians out here, but they were wisely framed laws that turned the convicts into free men and women. And free men and women helped make a democracy which has become a model for the world. They didn't do it just by being good-natured and easygoing, however famous they were, and you are for those qualities. They did it by carefully writing down the laws of a reasonable and humane society. The spirit of liberty that they felt within themselves, they made legible to others. The true celebration of this nation is in its constitution, in those dry-sounding but hard fought-for rules and regulations. Every family in this remarkable country has its rights protected and cherished. As it happened so long ago, many of you may not realize that part of my own education took place here in Australia. Quite frankly, it was by far the best part, and something which I shall always cherish. It gave me an insight into the character of this country and the individuals who have shaped it by the force of their personalities and by their infectious good humor. While I was here, I had the pommy bits bashed off me, like chips off an old block, and the results are only too obvious. I keep coming back for more, and it is always a special pleasure. But my wife and I are particularly glad to be here this year, on this great day, to help you, as if the Aussies needed help in anything, to celebrate your good fortune, and to wish you well for a future that holds out such great promise.
His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales. And now is the time when the First Fleet reenactment vessels are due to appear from Elizabeth Bay and proceed to Farm Cove. And while they assemble in Farm Cove, we'll hear a special overture.
The First Fleet reenactment boys are about to enter Farm Cove. They will do so to an overture composed of colonial themes from the founding countries of England, Scotland, Ireland and Wales, and they've been specially arranged for today by Douglas Gandy.
You can see the Soren Larsen now, the flagship of the First Fleet reenactment, entering Farm Cove.
And of course these vessels represent the First Fleet of 11 vessels, HMS Sirius, Her Majesty's brig, or His Majesty's brig Supply. They were the two King ships. And then the transports were the Alexander, the Scarborough, Fishburne, Golden Grove, Charlotte, Lady Penrhyn, Prince of Wales, Friendship and Borrowdale. In fact, I caught the Golden Grove ferry back to Balmain last night. It came to me, it must have been named after the First Fleet.
This overture on colonial themes, as it's called, is being performed to us by Australia's largest and busiest symphony orchestra, the Sydney Symphony Orchestra. The Soren Larsen.
Yes, I think that mainsail there, the well-known soft drink, is a little unfortunate.
Yes, I'm inclined to agree with you.
I think it's the sort of thing that perhaps we could have avoided. But still, that's a very small criticism of a wonderful sight. And the sight will get bigger and bigger as the minutes go by.
And a ring of spectator craft are forming a kind of welcoming circle through which the First Fleet vessels are gradually and in very stately fashion making their way.
Yes, it looks like a film set.
It looks with this wonderful score
it feels and looks fantastic, yes. And of course, in the backdrop to all those vessels on the water are the large cruisers there, Fair Star in the foreground. And it's a very crowded waterway indeed.
Among these 11 ships, we'll see the 7 ships that left Portsmouth back in May the 13th last year.
Yes, you're right about the film feeling when you have that music being played in the background. It's very effective, isn't it? When you see that sight and hear that sound. And there, what a crowded scene that is. It is quite splendid. And the weather's held off beautifully. It's a southeasterly breeze blowing, quite strong now. And the temperature has dropped rather. I think it's only about 22, 23. It's a splendid summer's day in Sydney. And not much humidity either. We remarked on that earlier. I think it really has been a perfect day. And they're right across. Oh, we're going up. We're going aloft. I think
Look at them standing on the spars there.
Yes. Well, we saw all the young
and
Endeavour crew standing on the yardarms just yesterday. The harbour is as crowded as late night shopping in the middle of Sydney. It's amazing. And there's a fire tender out there with the usual water display. And that rousing music.
Magnificent sight, isn't it? The Arsfanen there, the wooden barkentine from Canada.
Yes.
You can see her position as she comes, as
right,
they
and you can see beyond the island, beyond the bay there, to even bigger flotilla of small vessels in the background.
It's a wonder they can make their way in, it really is. Look at the little children in their mob caps for the occasion.
Yes, part of the First Fleeters Association. And the foreshores are groaning with spectators right through from here to the heads of Port Jackson.
You know, I think Rear Admiral Rothsay Swan was right. You could walk from one side of the harbour to the other.
Probably.
From vessel to vessel, almost.
Might get a little damp along the way, but it'd be a challenge for you.
The Arsfanen there from Canada, traditional wooden barkentine.
All these the fleet reenactment vessels will hope to gather in Farm Cove within a few minutes, actually. It's now 11:45 Eastern time, Eastern summer time, and round about 7 minutes to 12 our time, there'll be a military flypast that promises quite a spectacular scene.
We've been promised the largest military flypast ever seen in peacetime in Australia, in fact.
And Danny Boy, oh Danny Boy. Which will bring a few tears to some Irish descended eyes.
Now the Bounty appears to be wearing red sails for the occasion in the background there.
Yes, I was suddenly looking to see what the royal reaction was to all of this, but
I think we've had a better view than they do, Pete.
I think we do.
At this point.
Yes.
Now look at them all there on the Soren Larsen. They really almost could have come out in the last century or 2 centuries ago,
yes,
could they not? Even now.
There's no intimation of high technology anywhere around there.
No, that's right. And the barefoot boy on the bowsprit there. Yep. It's marvellous.
Yes, these square-rigged ships are really quite amazing sights, aren't they? You're not inclined to sing along with the orchestra, are you, Anne?
Not a sentimental woman.
I see. Late at night, perhaps you can be persuaded.
The 96 players of the Sydney Symphony Orchestra on home ground here, of course, the Sydney Opera House. Although they spend something like 8,000 kilometres a year, they travel a year on tour.
And of course they're to make a very important tour of the United States a little later this year as a part of the bicentenary program.
And like the event we're celebrating today, they grew from small beginnings back in 1908 as a small group of part-time musicians.
Yes, far from that now, very much respected orchestra. And we're back to the
Now
fly
we're
past
beginning to hear the drone of the aircraft as the fly past begins. They will fly over in 3 waves in all, beginning with about 15 Navy aircraft.
Yeah. Now there is one of the most crowded scenes you could possibly get. And here is a sort of, isn't this a Tom Thumb or something going by?
It looks like it, but I don't think it is. They've already...
I don't know who RO is. Yes. And the fly past is a very grand spectacle. And there you can see the Air Force is starting to be represented. They're getting closer towards us. We're starting off with the slow planes first, aren't we? These turboprops.
Now here comes the first wave of Navy aircraft, Squirrel helicopters and Sea King helicopters, in which of course Prince Charles' brother, Prince Andrew, flew off the aircraft carrier Invincible during the Falklands War.
Yes, they were very much the star performers in that conflict.
Well, they play an extremely dangerous role because they literally seduce incoming missiles away from the ship by tilting their rotor blades to interfere with the radar.
How do you know such things as that?
I have my spies.
I'm very impressed now. You'll become our defence correspondent immediately. Well, here the helicopters are hovering towards us, and
there are in that first wave of naval aircraft, there are 5 Squirrel helicopters, 4 Sea King helicopters, 4 Wessex helicopters, and somewhere 2 turboprop planes.
Yes,
used for electronic warfare
they're
training.
taking up the rear somewhere, quite apart from the 13 other civilian helicopters, of course, have been hopping around getting a marvellous view of this and providing tape for news bulletins and all the channels in Sydney. And the music is coming to something of a climax too. It seems to be all highly appropriate. I wonder if they rehearsed this.
The medley ends with Waltzing Matilda.
Good, my favourite tune. Well, they're taking a little while to get to us because it's sort of slightly foreshortened shot and you think they're closer than they really are. But
they're travelling from east to west over the Opera House steps and through to the Bradfield Highway, to the bridge.
They're not flying under the bridge, I hope.
Not as far as I know, no.
Here they come now. That's a great sight, isn't it? Coming directly over the tall ship. Yes. There's a change of mood with the music. I'm sure they've rehearsed all this. This is the first wave of the Air Force display. Well, not Air Force, of course, it comes from other services as well, the Navy included.
The sound of them as they go over. Going right over our heads now. Gorgeous.
And now following the
first
helicopters,
aircraft
we have the turboprops, I think. These are the slower aircraft.
The second wave of aircraft are Army aircraft, Kiowa light observation helicopters, Porter light aircraft and Nomads.
Yes, these are used for reconnaissance and surveillance. We can hear the drone of them as they approach. These are slow aircraft.
The orchestra launches into Rule Britannia.
It's entirely appropriate for these aircraft.
aircraft, obviously, the nomads and the porters of the army.
We'll have to speak up a bit, I think, Anne, in a moment. In fact, the whole commentary position seems to be shaking here at the moment.
That's just a fantastic sight.
Yes. It's quite a magical moment, I must say.
They fly across the
good contrasting sky.
The past and the present.
And the stirring patriotic song in the background from the Philharmonia Choir and the Sydney Symphony Orchestra.
There's something like 200 singers there today, combining the Sydney Philharmonia Choir and the Motet Choir.
Now the skies will almost be as crowded as the water.
The final wave of the fly past are 120 RAAF planes. They'll fly past in 4 waves, starting with the slowest aircraft and ending with the fastest, which means it'll get louder and louder as they go by, of course.
Indeed so. They will be ending with Mirage jets and so on. And there, of course, gives you a wonderful opportunity for those people who don't know Sydney well to see something of the geography, something of the bays and the coves of what is regarded as one of the great harbours of the world. And it looks really splendid today. It's dressed overall. And there's a great shot from our ABC helicopter, I think, which gives you a wonderful perspective.
Flying above the planes.
We should put our hands together for that shot alone, I think. Very steadily and beautifully held as they make their progress over the fair star.
They're flying relatively low, these aircraft. They're flying at altitudes between 700 and 1,500 feet, or 200 and 450 meters only.
Yes. Well, I think 500 is the absolute minimum, as I seem to remember, but...
500 feet?
Yes, I may be wrong about that.
No.
Here we go. This is the noise. There's the Sydney skyline, beautifully caught in one shot, as it were, with the Sydney Opera House at one boundary, centre point at the other. There are the helicopters.
Now we're seeing the first wave of Air Force aircraft here now.
And the Sydney Symphony Orchestra have stopped playing. We now have the
second military district band.
Is it the second military?
Yes,
Yes,
indeed.
Yep.
They're
just a very brief example of martial music.
To mark the arrival of the Defence Force Guard. Still they come, the planes.
Yes, it's hard to distinguish what sort of planes they are at this distance. They just look like little blobs in the sky, don't they?
Well, amongst the Air Force aircraft, they have a wave of helicopters, Chinooks, Iroquois, Squirrels, and then Caribou short-haul aircraft, which many people would be familiar with because they were used so extensively in Vietnam. The second wave are the Orion patrol aircraft and the Hercules aircraft. And then we begin to hear the jets, the really fast aircraft, the Mackeys and the Pilatus. And finally, of course, we'll see the FA-18 and F-111 aircraft and the Mirage.
I can't quite account for particular sound, can you? I seem to hear it somewhere. I'm not certain where it comes from. Well, it's nothing but spectacle, of course, here, because you have this extraordinary opera house. It's in itself a phenomenal thing to look at. The skies are full of aircraft, and the sea full of ships. up against the slowly gathering clouds. The clouds are slightly more rainy looking, I must say. They were there early this morning but disappeared. But it's held off very nicely indeed. We've had lovely conditions here. And now another, here come the jet ski.
The FA-18 Hornets, the F-111s and the Mirage. These are the final Mirages. These are the final wave of tactical fighter craft from the Air Force. And of course, the Governor of New South Wales, Air Marshal Sir James Rowland, was in fact senior engineer on the Mirage project in France in the early 60s. He was in charge of the oversight of specifications and contract training and so forth. So he has a particular feeling for them. Hear them roaring over.
And they were not trapping at full speed, of course. I guess half speed there, because there's only half the noise I anticipated.
There they go.
Well, I must tell you, and the Mile Lakes a few weeks ago with my two young children, suddenly a mirage swooped across the lake, and we threw ourselves to the ground. It was the most amazing experience. The last thing you expect in a quiet little country place.
Now the song, Waltzing Matilda, with the full forces, Joan Carden, the SSO, the choirs, the band of the 2nd Military District, conducted by William Reed.
Right throughout this nation, at this very moment, everyone should be singing.
I can't match Joan Carden. souvenirs, the flags falling out of the sky.
Yes,
on
they'll
little
be much treasured, I think, won't you? Parachuting Australian flags, falling onto ferries and small ships.
The air's full of them.
Yes. Yes, they will be happy recipients who lay their hands on one of those.
Listen to the fireworks.
Well, the sky is just amazing up there.
It's absolutely filled with these falling parachute flags, some of which have unfurled themselves and are waving out. All Australian flags.
Someone just said, are they people? No, they're not. They're flags. They're flags. That would be too much of a spectacle, I think, for parachuters to be falling into
I can see
Sydney Harbour.
people in the smaller craft leaning over to try and catch them as they fall.
Well, Cecil B. DeMille would have been pleased with
Proud
today's
of us,
effort.
I think, yes.
Indeed so.
I think so. Now, of course,
Start off with an enormous earthquake and go on from there. Well, it hasn't been like that. It's been actually one spectacle after another, and the whole thing has gone off marvellously well.
This is the conclusion of the official ceremony, of course. The vessels of the First Fleet, which you can see in Farm Cove, will remain anchored there until February the 28th. And then they'll move around until January the 28th, and then they'll move around to Darling Harbour, and they'll stay in Darling Harbour until mid-February. And after that, they'll sail off again.
And now the royal party is preparing to move back to Man of War Steps, I presume, again, to return back to Government House.
Prince Charles in conversation there with Barry Unsworth, behind him Sir Ninian Stephen.
There may, of course, be one of those surprising royal walkabouts too, which one can never be quite certain whether they
Exactly. Yes, they're leaving for Admiralty House from Man of War Steps.
Well, it isn't much over time. It's a little after...
Pretty much on schedule, actually.
Pretty much on schedule, isn't it? Yes.
There's smoke over the harbour from all the fireworks let off just a moment ago from the barge.
Right, and now the royal party and the viceregal party is moving away with Prince Charles now.
Having taken the royal salute, a very cunningly constructed version of both national anthems, the first 6 bars of the British national anthem and the first 4 and the last 4 of Advance Australia Fair.
Yes, I suppose it's a fairly easy amalgam of the two national anthems. I know some people do cavil a little bit about it, but of course with royal guests and Queen being the Queen of Australia and her son being heir to that monarchy, it's appropriate that the British national anthem should be played. And now they're walking away and the crowd is appreciative of their royal visitors. What a splendid occasion it's been, and we both feel very happy to have been here in our superb spot.
It's been a very privileged position that we've been in, and it's been the most wonderful ceremony, the major ceremony of Australia Day, with so much more to follow.
And Dunn and Peter Ross at the Sydney Opera House, and as I said, what a tremendous position they've had there. Good afternoon, I'm Barry Eaton, and I'll be with you right through the afternoon. We've got so much more, as Anne said, right through the afternoon for you with our Bicentennial telecast. We'll be crossing all over Australia. I've got special guests in the studio to join me, and it really is going to be a wonderful, wonderful day on television, so we hope you stay with us. Right now, we're going to go down to Canberra for the first of our interstate crosses, and there is a flag-raising ceremony that we're going to tune in right now.
Point is the setting for this morning's flag-raising ceremony. Here we are at Regatta Point, overlooking Lake Burley-Griffin, on what promises to be a magnificent Canberra day. We're here within the parliamentary triangle between Kings Avenue and Commonwealth Avenue bridges. The parade is led this morning by the band of the Royal Military College, Duntroon, the flag party from HMAS Harmon, and the Guard of Honour formed by cadets, also from the Royal Military College, Duntroon. The ceremonial dressing of the Guard is taking place, and all is set now for the arrival of His Excellency Sir Ninian Stephen, the Governor-General of Australia, and his group, including two well-known Canberrans, the Honourable Fred Daly, a former government minister, and Mrs. Marjorie Turbain, well known to those in the media in Canberra as the manager of the National Press Club. The Guard Commander, Senior Under Officer Smedley from the Royal Military College, will invite His Excellency, the Governor-General, to inspect the Guard. He'll be accompanied by the Honourable Fred Daly and by Flight Lieutenant Reynolds, the Air Force aide-de-camp to His Excellency. It's interesting to note, too, that this is the first public parade for some of the cadets of the Royal Military College, a new intake this year. guests here this morning, Major General and Mrs. Blake. Major General Blake, a holder of the Military Cross, won in the service of his country. Mrs. Turbane, of course, we mentioned before, Her Excellency, Lady Stephen, and Mr. and Mrs. John Langmore. Mr. Langmore, the member for Fraser, here in the national capital. It's particularly interesting to note here this morning the formal yet informal atmosphere, very relaxed, and marvellous to see the spontaneous applause for the RMC cadets from an enormous number of people gathered here at Regatta Point. Now, His Excellency, having performed the inspection of the Guard of Honour, the parade of cadets, is returning to the dais, and as is the tradition here in the national capital on such a day, will make the traditional few words to the people gathered, and then we'll make the request that the flag be raised, the raising of the Australian flag.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, the raising of the Australian flag on Australia Day is a long-established tradition, an Australian tradition, and raising it here in our national capital is symbolic of the unity of this nation of ours. This year, it's got special significance. Significance because we review our past 2 centuries, and reflect on what the future holds for all of us. Already, I think the events of the first 25 days of this bicentenary year have given us all a new sense of national involvement. We are, in this bicentenary year, reviewing and reflecting more deeply than ever before on our history of the past, both the 200 past years of white settlement and the 400 or more centuries of black occupation that preceded them. And that can't be other than good, because self-knowledge is as valuable for nations as it is for individuals. But it's really to the future that we've got to give most attention, learning from our past, applying experiences gained in the process to better managing that future, to make Australia a better place for more Australians. We're no longer the young nation we used to think ourselves. Among the nations of the world, as they stand today, our Commonwealth of Australia has known nationhood for longer than most, just as this country already provides a better life for its people than can most nations of the world. A better life, but still a life that's capable of great improvement through effort, especially effort towards improving the quality of life of those who are most in need in our community. And one of the truly joyful features of this bicentenary year is the great number of new citizens of Australia that we're welcoming into it. And here today, in a few minutes' time, some 200 more are joining our nation in citizenship, bringing their talents, bringing their energies to join with and to add to our own. We not only welcome them to the nation, but we want them to know how much we value their decision to become citizens of Australia. They are not only accepting a new national identity and a commitment to Australia as a nation, they are becoming part of a nation which is itself forging its own identity, and they will be contributing to that process. So I say to those 200, you're bringing with you your special gifts of skills, of languages and of cultures, which together are helping to add a great new richness to the fabric of Australia and Australians. So to you, welcome as Australian citizens, sharing with us our pride in being Australians on this Bicentennial Australia Day, and share too with us the future that lies ahead of us all. Thank you. And on this immense flagpole, one Canadian tree from a Canadian forest, but on this occasion a tree put to good use, I ask that now be raised the Australian flag.
Well, hold the sail together. That was the secret then. Now, of course, it's much more refined art. Technology has really got away. The carbon fibre hulls and Kevlar sails, and even the latest compound sails.
Well, look how fast they're going.
And that's Ericsson there with Jeremy Sharp, and he seems to be leading at least that little duo with Mike Walsh in the background there. And they're on starboard jibe and really powering down the harbour. Look at that. And they're heading up just past Nielsen Park at the moment, and I can see in the distance quite a throng and a very, very colourful sight as the 18-footers come into view. The CSR Grand Prix Challenge, just part of the action here on Sydney Harbour, and moving a fraction quicker than the first fleet reenactment was this morning.
How fast would they be going, do you think?
Oh, that...
And there once again we can see the incredible height of the masts as compared to the height of the Sydney Harbour Bridge. In fact, one of these ships had to wait until low tide the other day to be able to get underneath the harbour bridge with safety. Wouldn't want to sail all that way and lose the top of your mast. This is the Polish ship, the Damajerci, which is going underneath the bridge at the present time. And I think that is one of the tallest ships of the tall ships fleet that are out here at the present time. They certainly have. Look at that. The old and the new always make such a fascinating sight, don't they? It's amazing the crowds that have gone down to Darling Harbour through the week just to queue up for hours to get on board these tall ships. They've created just the most amazing amount of interest in Sydney. That's right.
And on the first fleet, of course, you know, they brewed their own beer on the way out.
They did?
Yes.
That would have made the voyage a little more palatable.
They also had fresh bread rolls for the officers every morning.
They baked them every morning on the ships out, didn't they? And yet the ships that came out in the first fleet were, what, under 100 feet in length? Conditions below decks must have been almost intolerable.
I think, too, that you would be stooping most of the time. 4'5" was the highest height between any of the decks. And of course, in the sleeping quarters, you probably crawled in and crawled out.
Oh, crawled out 4'5". That's a bit under 1.5 meters, isn't it?
You'd find it a little difficult.
Certainly, I would. Yes, 6'2". difficult for me. Look at that once again. You can see the tall mast just getting underneath the harbour bridge. I'm not quite sure whether it's high or low tide at the present time, but you certainly realise just how much margin for error they have according to the tidal movement. And at this time of the year, the tides, time and tide wait for no man, but the tides are fairly high in fluctuation. Yes, yes, let's hope that there are no collisions. Well, from Sydney Harbour, we're now going to head north in New South Wales to Tamworth, the home and the heart of Australian country music. And last Saturday night, the annual Country Music Awards were held. We're going to cross to Tamworth now for a performance by the NREC Studio Band.
G'day Australia, I'm Stan Costa, and with the NREC Studio Band,
the Queen. His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, on this very auspicious occasion, will you please drink a toast to Australia?
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Coffee will now be served.
Well, that was the scene inside the overseas terminal where the state luncheon is taking place. The toast to Australia. Coffee is being served, so we'll take a break from the overseas terminal and first of all back out onto Sydney Harbour, then
For the reenactment, two British Navy officers are taking the roles of pioneer explorers George Bass and Matthew Flinders. 15-year-old Bankstown youth Adam Blythe is playing Bass's servant in the 4-day voyage, the Boy Martin.
What sort of difficulties are you expecting to encounter on the trip? Tide especially, really. It's a small boat. If we have the tide against us, it won't be easy at all. The boat's got a very low freeboard. If we ship any water, if we hit any big waves, we might ship some water. That'll be difficult.
The boat, built by students of Sydney Technical College, is an exact replica of the original vessel, the Tom Thumb. It was an epic voyage, taking on the open seas outside Sydney Harbour to Botany Bay to explore the uncharted waters of the Georges River in search of new land for settlement.
Well, they really didn't know where they were going, so they didn't have charts like we have. We actually have a radio with us for safety, just in case. But, you know, it was a bit of an adventure for them because they didn't know exactly where they were going at all. So we're taking the easy way. We have a safety boat as well. I noticed a few storm clouds looming up there. Are you a bit worried about the weather? Yes. What happens if you're caught in a storm out there? Well, I don't know. Very wet, I think. But you do have a patrol boat following you, so... Yeah. We've got life jackets on board just in case, and as I said before, a radio. So we should be fairly safe. Just pretty uncomfortable if it does rain. Adam, what made you decide to go on this trip? I'll try anything. I'll try anything.
In keeping with the historical spirit of the occasion, the ceremonial side began with an enactment of the voyage's commissioning by the colony's governor, John Hunter.
Gentlemen, I remind you that as officers of His Majesty's Royal Navy, you should conduct yourselves at all times in the best traditions of the service.
Then it was into the boat for the start of the hardest leg of the journey, through the harbour and into the Pacific. Weather permitting, the crew was planning to reach Botany Bay on the first night. They'll have to average 13 miles a day, camping on the shore at night, to cover the 40 miles to Garrison Point of Bankstown by 10 a.m. on Australia Day. it won't be a comfortable journey. With authentically heavy 18th century costume, reduced rations of salt pork flour and molasses, and the strong chance of a southerly change, the 20th century Bankstown may well be a welcome sight for the crew in 4 days' time.
And that was Eric Campbell last Saturday, Prime Minister, with the launch of the 1988 Tom Thumb. Quite an epic voyage.
What an exciting adventure. Tremendous, really. Particularly looking at these storm clouds and wondering what was going to take place.
That's true. Well, that was last Saturday.
Yes,
we'll catch up
yes.
in just a few moments as what's happening today. But I believe you have to leave us now.
I do. I
think your chauffeur is grovelling at the door over there.
Is he really?
Yes.
He knows how to behave, doesn't he? I've trained him well.
Yeah.
Well, can I just say it's been a great honour and privilege for you to have me.
Oh, thank you.
And I'm not going to shake hands with you, if you don't mind.
I did wash them especially.
No, I won't shake hands with you because I don't want...
Conditions I've had to put up with for the past 4 days. There's people lined along the riverbanks just egging them on that final distance, and the whole event really seems to have captured the imagination of Bankstown. There's hundreds of people here and they're in for a really big welcome.
Further, boy, further. Okay. Further, my boy, further. Jump it. Yes, congratulations on your achievement. Your strength of mind and body, your worthy successes to those whose voyage you were reenacting. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Well done. Well done. Thank you. Good morning.
Well, guys, how did it go?
Well, it's fairly rough on the first day. We got swamped.
You got swamped?
We sank, yes.
You sank?
We sank, yes.
And what happened?
Well, what happened? We were going out just after the heads. We had to row for about 2.5, 3 hours, maybe. Then the wind came up quite strongly from the northeast, and we were running down sea. And then she just dived into one trough, and we didn't come up, basically. Yeah.
So you would have had 2 days of almost constant rain?
Yeah. We've soaked on both days, actually. It's quite cold, actually, in the wind, and you get a squall, and then the rain would fall, and then you get another squall, and the rain would fall. So we're getting quite cold.
Well, how was the rest of the trip after that?
Oh, in the river, it was really quite pleasant, actually.
And would you both do it again, all three of you?
Next year.
Not today. Well, one final question. Even with all sincerity, you did have radios and life jackets and backup support. What do you think of Bass and Flinders now, who did the whole thing on their own without any help of support if something went wrong?
Very intrepid, very adventurous, and very brave. Yes, very brave indeed.
I think Bass and Flinders may have chosen weather more better suited to the occasion. I think if it would have been raining on the day that they left, Bass and Flinders might have thought, well, we'll do it tomorrow. But they had a schedule to keep, and they've kept to it very well.
So you maybe even had a rougher trip than Bass and Flinders did?
Yes, we had water stewards to contend with too. You know.
Okay, well, enjoy the celebration.
Princess Diana are on board the HMAS Cook, and they'll be proceeding out now to review the parade of sail. But in the meantime, we're going to head north up to Brisbane. There's been big celebrations in Brisbane today, as indeed there have been all over Australia for this telecast on square rig vessels. Peter, the square rig vessels that are gracing our harbour at the present time, there are so many different styles of them, but we see that barks and we see various things. Is there an immediate difference?
Yes, there is. If you want to start with full square rig ship, they were square rigged on every mast. And if you start taking the square rig off the masts from the aftermost first, you get a bark. You take them off the next mast, you start getting barkentines. until you
so
come...
is a barkentine sort of a lesser version of a bark almost?
It's a lesser version of a bark. With the decrease in crew, they had to take a lot of this labour-intensive gear off the ships. So they were made easy to sail by putting, there's a fully rigged ship. So if you start with a fully rigged ship and reduce the square rig from the mizzen, or take it off completely and just replace it with fore and aft.
The mizzen mast being
the aftermast. And there you have a bark. They've taken the square rig off the mizzen.
Right.
Now if you take the square rig off the mainmast, you end up with a barkentine.
A barkentine, which we have on screen right now.
Then go further and take the square rig off the foremast and you end up with a schooner. There we have a brig, the same thing. You start off with a brig, take the square rig off the mizzen, or actually the mainmast, we call it. You have mainmast and foremast, and you have a brigantine, which is a little brig.
A little brig.
Yeah. And there are various versions of those. There were snows, and you had jackass barks and jackass brigs.
So the first fleet, what was that made up of?
They were ships. They were all full-rig ships. That's what they started with, and because they had lots of people to handle the gear. And as the labour got scarce later in the century, they had to take this labour-intensive gear off, and it became expensive.
Was this because they had so many convicts on board they had to reduce the crew? Or?
No. That was all they had. They were all ships. They were all rigged as ships.
All fully rigged ships, right.
See, Cook's Endeavour was the same. It was square rigged on every mast.
And the amazing thing, we were talking the other day, and you were telling me that they have to run before the wind. They can't tack like modern yachts.
They were sailing at 90 degrees to the wind and making leeway. They could point up at probably 60 degrees to the wind, but they would achieve, or the result would be a 90-degree angle from the wind.
Which means you're not getting anywhere.
Not getting anywhere at all. In fact, those things like Bounty and Endeavour, and Victory too, they were sailing at actually 95 degrees to the wind. They were plotting 95 degrees on the chart.
So they were going backwards?
Going backwards.
So this is, of course, the reason why they took so long to get out here.
Yes. It was, apart from they stopped everywhere, and their speed was restricted to as normal convoys, the speed was restricted or limited to the slowest vessel.
I think we're very lucky today, too. The prevailing wind obviously helped all of the tall ships to be able to get into
the wind on camera now.
Eye of the Wind, is it?
She's a beautiful, it's working out of Sydney on charter work. It's a beautiful ship and faithfully restored. It's in beautiful condition.
At this stage, Peter, we're going across to HMAS Canberra for a report from the harbour, and here's Gordon Bray.
Thanks very much, Barry, and yes, we're on HMAS Canberra, which is a guided missile frigate, and with me is the Director of Tall Ships in the Northern Hemisphere, our expert commentator today, John Hamilton. Well, John, you've seen scenes like this around the world, but how does it rate?
Oh, it's got to be the most exciting one I've ever seen. I don't think I've ever seen so many craft on the water, and I'm happy to say, behaving very well indeed too. That's very important because as the excitement builds, when the parade of sail starts, I hope they go on behaving like that, but it's got to be an exciting scene.
It's not really going to be a parade of sail though, is it, because of this breeze? It looks to be southeast at the moment, about 11 knots, so they're going to have to reduce as much sail, particularly with the square rig sail.
Yes, that's right. Sadly, they won't be able to set very much square canvas unless the wind changes direction. I hope that they'll set their fore and aft sails, and that will be something to look at. But we can't have it always. When the first fleet came in this morning, they had a commanding wind, they looked grand. So we've been spoiled in the morning. Sadly, we won't be spoiled in the afternoon as well, I'm afraid.
Yes, John, I'm quite sure there's a deal of confusion about the first fleet and the tall ships. Perhaps you might like to outline the differences.
Yes. The first fleet which came in this morning, everybody said they couldn't do it, and I must say, I have to tell you, I was one of the ones who said they couldn't do it, and they've done it. And that's a fantastic birthday present, I think, to Australia. And they are, as you know, as their name says, reenacting that first voyage 200 years ago. Now, the tall ships are something completely different. They are all training ships. The crews of those ships, and they have to be for our races, aged between 16 and 25. They're all young people, boys and girls, under training. Some of them are cadets for their merchant service, some of them are Navy cadets, And some of them are just your kids, my kids, everybody's kids, undergoing a fortnight or a month on board these ships to help them in their process of growing up.
And it seems that Australia can look forward to a sail training program now too.
Yes, that's to me the most exciting thing out of this. I understand, I'm told, that not only are you having a birthday party in 1988, but the whole bicentennial program is aimed at setting up things for the next 200 years. And it's really good that so many ships have had this goal of getting ready for the Tall Ships event in 1988, January 88. Such ships as the Lewin, the Alma de Pel has had a big refit, and of course there's the famous already, Young Endeavour, and many other training ships have been built and are still being built, such as the Lady Nelson in Hobart, so that Australia can start its own sail training program, which has been so successfully operated in the Northern Hemisphere, starting very much in 1960. That's when the movement started in a big way. So now Australia happily will be joining in that.
Okay, John, I think we're getting very close to the start of the parade of tall ships now. I think something like 130 countries make up the population of Australia, and many of those countries are represented in the Tall Ships Parade, which is about to get underway. So for the time being, it's back to Barry.
Gordon Bray and John Hamilton on HMAS Canberra, and the parade of tall ships due to get underway very soon. And boy, what a sight that is going to be. Meanwhile, in Newcastle, just north of Sydney, they're getting ready for the start of the parade of sail. Peter Haas, as I said, our expert on square rigs, with us here today. Peter, it must be pretty tough for the people who are trying to get the square riggers going down the harbour with these massive small ships everywhere. Massive small ships. Massive amount of small ships. Look at them. I mean, how on earth can you steer through all of that?
Well, hopefully there's a corridor being formed. They'll be patrolling and keeping this corridor open. They'll be moving very slowly and it won't have much steerage, so they can't manoeuvre very quickly.
How flexible are they to handle?
Oh, they're fully powered with engines, so they can they handle like an ordinary ship.
But if they're coming down under full sail, as we hope they are, I heard Gordon Bray say before it's a sou'easter at the moment, so it may be difficult to come under full sail. But
well, they'll sail down the harbour out towards the entrance with some sail up. But some of the ships, if they put too much up, they'll be moving very quickly because they'll gather speed and they're very hard to stop.
What sort of speed do they move at?
In a
profusion ships there. Look at that.
The speed will vary. Of course, they can control their speed with the amount of sail they have with the breeze that's blowing. But the thing is, they're very hard to stop.
Well, that's what I was wondering, if there's any danger of a collision with some of these small boats. I was on the harbour on Boxing Day at the start of the Sydney-Hobart race, and the profusion of ships and small boats is quite frightening.
And under those conditions, they're all moving very quickly. They all rush down the harbour when the gun goes.
Precisely.
And
at the end of a long day and sun with the odd cleansing ale or two, you wonder whether or not everything is going to go as planned this afternoon.
Well, this one, the ships, because they're moving up and back, I don't think the boats will be rushing, and they'll be moving very slowly, so you won't have that high-speed rush with the spectator craft. That's Young Endeavour. Is that on the screen?
Which ship is this at the moment, Ben?
That's Young Endeavour.
Oh, that's the Young Endeavour. So that's the gift from Britain to Australia for the bicentenary.
A brigantine, going squares on the foremast and fore and aft on the main, with staysails and headsails.
And quite a brisk sort of a breeze there too, as we could see from the flags. Happy birthday.
Birthday Oz.
Oz. Oh, that's what it is. Well, it looks like it's going to be a few minutes yet before the parade of sail is ready to get underway. So we're going to go across and take a musical break from one of the bands playing around Sydney Harbour.
That was a composition by Bernie McGann, arranged by Roger Frampton, has the title Lazy Days.
That's the Australian Jazz Orchestra playing at the Sydney Opera House, where they've just released all these magnificent profusion of balloons from Fort Denison. And as they drift slowly through the sky, they make an even greater sight here in Sydney Harbour today. You wonder how many other things there are to do on a day like this today, Peter.
Well, I think it's enough for me to see all these square riggers. Marvellous.
Thing is sailing, man. The Australian Jazz Orchestra, by the way, playing in the forecourt of the Sydney Opera House, was led by James Morrison and featured that great man Don and Burroughs. We've, by the way, heard from Executive Chief Superintendent Ken Chapman of the New South Wales Police about the crowds in Sydney today. The police have never seen crowds like this before. They're estimating that in the city alone there are approximately 500,000 people. Then when you add all the people on the north side of the harbour, they are estimating a crowd of at least 1 million people are in attendance today for the Bicentennial celebrations in Sydney. And the good thing about it is that the crowd are all well behaved. There have been no reports of disturbances or any outlandish behaviour at this stage, which is really good to hear, because if they got out of hand, it could spoil the whole proceedings.
That's the effect sailing ships have.
Now we're going to... the effect sailing... You had to get that plug in, didn't you?
So good for
Now we're going to take you down to Canberra to catch up on the events there.
Yes, well, it really is a bicentennial gift to Australia, and now Australia's official sail training ship. Some 7,000 young Australians applied for the 12 berths from all states and territories, and the spots eventually went fully representative around the nation. And John, you had a bit to do with the selection of some of the British people on board.
Yes, I did. I had the honour to be the chairman of the selection of 6 young British girls, 6 British lads, which we held at a naval base down near where I live in our midwinter, your January, and it was a pretty tough selection. There was one marvellous picture, television picture, of a girl just coming to the end of the obstacle course and actually breaking the ice on one of the big puddles there, and I better not repeat what she said.
Yes, well, the tall ships commemorate our country's dependence on the sea and sailing ships for the survival of our early settlers and the development of our nation. 17 nations have honoured our bicentenary by officially dispatching representatives of their governments. And one of the strongest representations in the tall ships parade is Poland, but we'll be seeing the Dartmoor jersey a little later.
I think, Gordon, this first group is very exciting because they are all Australian sail training ships, and it's my belief that sail training has only just hit Australia, and I'm delighted that it has done. And in this first leading group of the tall ships, headed by Young Endeavour, following the Young Endeavour, you've got the Lewin from West Australia and Alma Dopel from South Australia, and then Defender and Solway Lass. And it's on these vessels that the future of sail training depends. These and other vessels still coming along. And to me, that's very exciting.
Yes, it certainly is a wonderful legacy for Australia's future, but this is a celebration of the past, it's a celebration of the present, and with the prospect of a full sail training program for Australia, that really is a great fillip to the young people around the country. Yes, one of the provisos is for a tall ship, you have to have at least 50% trainees aged 16 to 25. Now, why that age group?
Well, you can't have too wide an age group, because what is fun and good training and exciting for a 16-year-old can be pretty boring for a 24 or 25-year-old, and vice versa. And so it's been decided that that's the ideal age. And we're looking now at the crew of the Guayas manning the yards in their coloured shirts there, and that's a pretty dramatic sight. Guayas, which is leading the third group of this parade of sail. But going back to the crew ages, younger than 16, the sort of training they do is really too arduous for the average 15-year-old. I know there are great strapping lads of 15 who've been sailing in the family boat and know a lot about it, they do fine. But these ages have got to be based on the average youngster, and we find that 16 is about the youngest age that can cope with the rigors of offshore sailing, because it's not easy. I mean, you have to be dug up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go on watch, and you do that not just perhaps for one night, but 2 or 3 nights running. And younger than 16, they really can't cope. As I say, if you have too wide an age range, then the training isn't very good either.
Yes, well, it's a chance for young people to break down the political barricades. We have competing nations from behind the Iron Curtain, and an opportunity for them to build greater ties and much better understanding and goodwill between nations and mariners. And the Guayas, a beautifully appointed craft. What's the accommodation like below?
The accommodation on the Guayas should be, I must admit I haven't been below in Guayas, but it should be quite modern, because she was only built some 10 years ago. It's quite interesting. I think that some people looking at these magnificent square riggers may think that they are an echo of the past. Well, of course, in design they are, but in construction, some of them are very new indeed. Young Endeavour only got herself finished last June, and that was a real cliffhanger, whether she'd be built in time to sail all the way out to Australia in time for the birthday.
And she's also leading a group of naval boats from Victoria and New South Wales. So that's the scene here from HMAS Canberra. This parade of tall ships is underway.
Well, here on board Guayas, I can answer some of those questions about the accommodation below. We actually voyaged all the way up from Hobart. It took us a week, and I must tell you the accommodation is a little cramped, to say the least. 11 of us were in one very small, rather cramped bunk. But rather, I should say, rather cramped cabin with 11 bunks. But with me is someone who can tell you more about that, Midshipman Paul Cantor from the Royal Australian Navy. Now, Paul, you've been on board for a month on an exchange. What is life like on board? Is it tough? Is it hard work?
There is a lot of hard work. It is tough in some ways. A lot of rope handling.
But come on, now you told me you got water twice a day for 20 minutes only for 43 or 63 of you to have a shower.
Yeah, well, that is the tough bit. You miss out, you have to live with it. Just try and get the shower the next one round.
And you hope your friends don't mind too much.
Certainly not.
Paul, you've obviously had a fantastic time on board this ship. I've known these people for a week. They're wonderful people. How much has it meant to you being on board here?
It's meant the world to me, and today to see everyone turning out, it's absolutely fantastic. It's made the whole trip worthwhile.
Do you think this sort of sail training really does build something for the future for you? We were hearing just now that it's tough and you need to be well over 16 plus to be able to take it. Is it tough?
Well, it is tough. You have to know what you're doing. It's easy to get hurt on one of these ships. Just have to keep your sense about you, and there is a lot of tough work.
But just tell me what it was like the first time you went up one of these masts. I mean, the main mast is 37 meters high. That's a long way.
It's a long way. The first time, for me, was absolutely terrifying. But the next time, it seemed like nothing. It's a molehill.
A molehill? Some molehill. I've been up halfway, and it's, I might tell you, a big molehill. Well, here on Guayas, there's this tremendous feeling of party. This ship has the name of being the party ship. It's the only tall ship in the fleet with a band on board, and I might tell you, we've had La Bamba in the middle of the Bass Strait, out in the ocean, 25-foot waves, and La Bamba for band practice. Now that's something quite unique. I might say we had to cut it short because there was an emergency. All hands on deck, the wine went over the side, and discipline returned instantly. And you might wonder, by the way, why all the crew are wearing Gladstone t-shirts. Well, they had such a fantastic reception when they arrived in Gladstone that the city of Gladstone sent them a box full of t-shirts and said, please wear these for us. So they have. And they've made friends for life in Gladstone. Indeed, some of the young ladies from Gladstone actually flew down here to Sydney to see the friends that they'd made at Christmas. some of the crewmen spent Christmas with the Gladstone people, had Christmas dinner with them, and they were so taken that they've rejoined those friendships here, and I dare say they'll last for a lifetime. But that's the nature of tall ships, and that's the nature of sailing, and the whole sailing fraternity right around the world. Wherever these ships go, they make friends, and those friends will last for a lifetime, as will the memories that they've made here. Now we're just heading down, having passed under Sydney Harbour Bridge and past the Opera House, heading down towards the open sea. Unfortunately, as you can see, because of the wind, we can't set any major sail. But the yards are dressed, every man is up on those yards, and the men right on the top there are some 30-odd metres above the water. One slip and you're a goner, but you might care to know that nobody has ever fallen from the yard on Guayas. It has a record of unsurpassed safety. As you were hearing earlier, she's only 11 years old, built in 1977 in Spain, but with all the traditions of the square riggers that Cook and Phillips would have sailed out here to Australia. She's keeping alive a tradition that will now be part of Australia as well. So I'm going to leave you and enjoy my stay on board Guayas. I hope we'll see you again soon on Guayas. And I must say to you, hasta luego. That's how they say it in Ecuador. Back to the studio.
Yes, well, here on board HMAS Canberra, a crew of 173 on board Guayas, and she certainly portrays a grand sight from the ABC airship. And you'll notice that tradition of manning the yards. You might like to explain that.
Yes, I haven't been able to see some of the earlier commentary, and I guess somebody would have said this already, but it probably bears saying again that the tradition of manning the yards, as they're doing on Guayas there, is to show that the majority of the ship's company are up where they can be seen. They're not skulking down below, getting the guns ready for firing, getting the guns suddenly ready to run out and give the Opera House a great raking broadside. It was in fact to show that you were a friendly ship and that the majority of your hands were in the rigging. And I think the other interesting thing to see there as Guayas comes under the Sydney Harbour Bridge is that she's got what we call the fore and aft sails set. That's the triangular ones. And the squaresails are hanging rather untidily from the great yards, the great spars which stick out at right angles to the mast on which the cadets are standing. Now, those sails hanging down untidily, in fact, it has a name. It's called hanging in the gear. And it means that they could set those squaresails quite quickly if they wanted to. Normally when they're in harbour or out at sea in a strong blow, they have those sails really tightly secured to the yards by means of gaskets. But now they've let the gaskets go and the sails are hanging in their gear, ready in case there should be a wind shift, and they could show off the magnificent squaresails.
Yes, well, she competed in the tall ships race, the first ever held in the southern hemisphere from Hobart to Sydney. And on her way to Hobart, she came via Brisbane, and she's leading a unit comprising of several Australian Navy vessels, as I mentioned, Alexandra of Creswell, Friendship of Lewin, Scarborough of Cerberus, Charlotte of Cerberus, Lady Penryn of Nirimba, and these vessels based in Victoria and New South Wales and named after the original First Fleeters.
Yes, all the names, or the majority of the names of these Navy ships bear the names of the First Fleet. And I have to say again, what a magnificent arrival that First Fleet made, having confounded a lot of experts, and dare I say it, including myself. And they've got here in one piece, thank God, and made a tremendous impact and a tremendous start to this Maritime Day. I think it must be almost called a Maritime Day, Maritime Australia Day.
Yes, this is Australia's way of honouring its heritage by hosting these tall ships from all over the world, these great square rig ships. They were the lifeline to a young, emerging nation. And have you ever seen a scene like that? I don't think it's ever occurred, has it?
I've never seen quite so many. I've seen gatherings of tall ships that took my breath away, but never have I seen so many. It's interesting that perhaps the idea of holding a parade of sail started with the very successful parade in New York for the American Bicentennial in 1976. And this is every bit as dramatic, I would say almost more dramatic than that 1976 parade in the Hudson River.
Yes, well, following Guayas is Gorge Fock, the West German boat, a three-masted bark, and quite similar to the Guayas. And
can I tell you a little story about the Gorge Fock? Well, it's a story about any of the training ships. This is their way of saying thank you to the people of Sydney and to all the Australian ports by means of television, to say thank you for the immense amount of hospitality that they've received while they've been in Sydney and in the other ports. And it's also important to realize that this is a ceremonial occasion, a saying of thanks. But I remember seeing the Gorge Fock taking part in a parade of sail like this in her own country in Bremerhaven, and I said, when I went on board half an hour later to a cocktail party, I said to the steward serving the drinks, "What were you doing half an hour ago?" And he said, "Half an hour ago I was furling the royals." And so they have to be able to be up in the rigging there, working the sails, back down on deck, helping to run a cocktail party, then keeping watch, steering, so many different jobs. And they're pretty versatile, these guys.
And you spent a bit of time on these vessels yourself, I'd imagine.
Yes, I have. I've been very lucky. I've had some seagoing jobs. In fact, I was the executive or the chief officer of the Shebab Oman, who we'll see later. So I have spent some time at sea as well as behind a desk.
Some of the smaller vessels coming through in these units.
That looks like the French Esperance.
Esperance is a 44-metre timber schooner built in Spain and skippered by Nicole Legler. She's, I think, one of the few lady skippers of the tall ships, and a very pretty one at that.
Yes, she is. She very nearly got something knocked off her rating. When I met her, I thought we'll have to help her a little bit with the rating there for the race, but I managed not to do that. I'm sure that the captain of Gorge Fock will be very sad that he can't set those square sails. Many of you will know that the Polish ship Darmojeji sailed under Sydney Bridge on her way into port with only 10 feet to spare under her masts, and she incidentally had to go under low water. And the first question the captain asked when he got alongside, did the Gorge Fock sail, or was I the first?
Well, every imaginable vantage point in and around the harbour, and we certainly have a beautiful spot on HMAS Canberra. Their Royal Highnesses are aboard HMAS Cook, which is a survey and oceanographic vessel. Does a lot of civilian research as well for the CSIRO, universities and the museum. But HMAS Canberra is the latest state-of-the-art guided missile frigate.
Probably people heard that boatswain's call just then, which was sounding the still. Guayas is a Navy ship and is saluting HMS Canberra.
So the Esperance just threading her way through this vast armada of craft. And astern of Esperance, some very interesting smaller boats. And for here we might just clarify this idea of the tall ships. They don't always have to be big vessels. The minimum length can be 30 feet on the waterline, or just over 9 metres. But as long as 50% of the crew are cadets or trainees between the ages of 16, 20, 25, and it's a single hull, well, they qualify as a tall ship.
Well, that's right. There's a marvellous poster which I've seen in all of the ports. You don't have to be big to be tall. And so although you're looking at the magnificent larger ships, at the moment you can see some of the smaller ones, and some indeed are very small indeed.
Yes, that's Amanda, a 15-metre ketch all the way from Tasmania. And a very strong Tasmanian fleet involved here on Sydney Harbour today. It's great to see them making the journey north. In company just further towards the far shore, Maya, a former radio relay vessel on the Sydney Hobart race. Agro, Wraith of Hamble from Victoria. Adam's Apple, Cabaret, a South Australian ketch. Ormoona, Averest and Balia.
The swarm is the rigging and got the ships ready. Oops, there I am through my monitor. So here. Hi, James Valentine here on board the US Coast Guard bark, the Eagle. And we're getting a sort of deckhand's eye view of the whole activity here. We just started on the huge wheels that spin the ship around. 6 of the crew will haul on those wheels and spin it around, and up there into the rigging, where several hours ago the men and the crew of the US Coast Guard Eagle were up in there preparing the sails to be unfurled. Hopefully they'll unfurl them all the way for us a little bit later on. It's been quite fascinating being on board here during the day. Obviously we've been hearing the descriptions of how beautiful it all looks from the shore. Here you can get quite a fantastic idea of just how much it takes to operate one of these enormous great ships. And we're going to be talking now for a moment, in just a moment, with the captain of the US Coast Guard bark, the Eagle, Captain Ernst Cummings, coming in to have a bit of a chat to us about the operation of the ship and what's been going on with that. So let's go to Captain Ernst Cummings now. We right now? Captain Cummings, how are you?
Hi, how are you today? Welcome aboard.
Thank you very much. Captain, what's going on after this parade of sail in the next few months with the ship?
Next few months of the ship, of course, will be going back to the United States, returning across the Pacific to American Samoa, Hawaii, the West Coast, through the canal and up to our home port of New London, Connecticut.
Right, you've got a whole new crew on board, I believe, picked up in Brisbane?
We got a new crew on in Brisbane, and as soon as we get back to New London, we'll get another new crew, and then we leave for Europe.
Right. So that whole trip would be pretty good training for them across the Pacific.
Yes, it's excellent training for them, just super. And it's such a thrill for them to be here in Australia and being able to meet the people from Australia who have just treated us wonderfully.
How long have you been on board the Eagle?
A little over 5 years now.
Wonderful experience?
Oh, it certainly is.
Right. Well, thanks for coming out here and joining us on the parade of sail here on Australia Day.
Well, thank you, and I just want to say happy birthday to all Australians.
Thank you very much, Captain Cummings. That's Captain Cummings of the US Coast Guard bark, the Eagle. The Eagle was built in 1936. It was originally a German ship, taken over after the Second World War for training with the US Coast Guard. It's one of the larger tall ships. It's a 3-masted bark, and we're heading up now towards the bridge. We might come back perhaps when we get closer to the bridge, because these masts are so tall that the ship only just scrapes in. They're just 2 metres under the bottom level of the bridge. In fact, when we came through earlier in the morning, the huge cheer went up from all the people standing on the bridge, because it was quite obvious that we were only just going to make it through and underneath there. We're back up in there looking at the rigging of the ship at the moment. As I was saying before, it's quite fascinating trying to follow exactly what's going on. Members of the crew bark orders through this brass megaphone, inexplicable language, but everybody else on board the ship can understand it. Starts hauling on the ropes, brings around the topsails or the royal gallant or whatever it is they're meant to be doing. So that's all from on the Eagle at the moment. Hopefully the sails will be down soon and we'll be going under the bridge and joining the rest of the ships in the parade of the sail. So back to the studio.
So there are some 200 tall ships competing, and over 40 of those come from 20 overseas countries, and some of them have sailed more than 10,000 miles from Europe, or in the case of the Americas, over 6,000 miles, to be part of Australia's bicentenary birthday celebration.
We were hearing just now about the problem of getting under bridges. When we had a big festival of sail in London, the Gauge Fock actually hit Tower Bridge with Flagstaff, and the captain said, I forgot that the Flagstaff was up there. But he got his own back because on the way out he sailed out onto Tower Bridge, and I think the pilot nearly had kittens at that point.
Yes, most of these vessels are still on the other side of the bridge, going right up the river, and it's going to be a long time before they all make their way up to HMAS Cook. But the spectator craft are extremely well behaved, and it really is a tribute to the Water Police, the Maritime Services Board, and all the volunteers who have made this possible and have made it work so smoothly.
Yes, not only volunteers today, I think that there are many, many, many people who have to be thanked in Sydney and in all the other ports where the tall ships have visited. Each of these ships, big and small, has had at least one liaison officer, a volunteer, sometimes a yachtsman, sometimes service personnel, who've given up 5 or 6 days of their time to look after these boats and ships and make them feel welcome. And harbour staffs, emergency staffs, they've all worked doubly hard in order to entertain and look after these ships. They're all to be thanked. Quite interesting looking at that picture there. I think it was the Gauche Fock, to see the yards with, as I say, now we can see those sails ready for setting on Eagle, the US Coast Guard cutter Eagle. Very easy to spot with that go fast flash on the bow there. Unfortunately, didn't make her go too fast in the race, sadly, because the wind was in the wrong direction for them. But there they are with the sails hanging in their gear, ready for setting. A very, very fine picture there of the bark Eagle. And this business of rigs is quite interesting, I think. Eagle is a bark because she has more than 2 masts and is square rigged on the foremast and the mainmast, but has fore and aft rig on the mizzen mast. A very similar rig to Gauche Fock. There are in fact 5 virtually identical square riggers in the world, of which Gauche Fock and Eagle are 2. Now we're looking at Asgard. Asgard was shipped over here. Sadly, she couldn't sail out under her own keel because, of course, she has an important training role to do in her own country. And so when she finished her summer season in Ireland, she was put on board a container ship, brought over to Sydney, put back in the water, and the mate and bosun rigged her in 3 days, and she was able to sail down to Hobart and proudly, back to Melbourne, I beg your pardon, to Melbourne and then to Hobart, and proudly took her place in the race. And you can see quite a large national ensign flying there from Asgard.
And there are 12 young Australians on board Asgard 2, which is skippered by Tom McCarthy.
Yes, Tom's got a very difficult job because there's a tremendous history to Asgard. The Asgard scheme was very largely started by a man called Captain Eric Healy, who had a yacht called the Asgard as his first command, and then he had this dream of building this brigantine. And about 5 years ago she was finished, and I was telling you the story about I was invited to the ceremony, and I said, is it a launching ceremony? He said, no, it's a naming. We had our first sea trials today. And I said, how did they go? And he said, oh, they went very well. We had the sails up, but we didn't use them.
Who needs sails? But a very interesting boat in this particular unit, which is off the starboard quarter, bringing up the rear of Unit 7, led by Asgard 2, is probably the oldest vessel taking part in the Tall Ships Parade, Playmate of Malden. She was built back in 1896, and we may get a chance to pick her up. She's at the rear of this unit led by Asgard 2. Emerald Green brigantine from the Republic of Ireland. And that's the scene aboard HMAS Cook. The Prime Minister, Prince Charles and Princess Diana, who must have been very moved by that ceremony this morning at the Opera House, and a magnificent fly past.
I understand Princess Diana changed her mind and said she did want to see the parade of sail. I'm sure she has no reason to regret that decision.
Well, there's the harbour bridge. And look at the clearance. Damagergi.
Damagergi, the tallest ship in the fleet. And from here it looks quite close as to whether she's going to... No, it's not the Damagergi. I'm sorry, it's the Nippon Maru. Nippon Maru.
Well, she's a four-masted